and use peak numbers because we want to see the worst case scenario that we have to deal with.
Right. Okay, that was just my question. I
Yeah,
did
we
read
try
it.
and cover all the bases. We always try and look at worst case when we're going through things like this on studies and designs,
Yeah, that's what it was. It was from 11 a.m. to 2:30.
which is typically your peak usages.
Yeah, okay. Yep, I just want to make sure it wasn't affected if everybody's home.
It should not.
Yeah, okay,
We should be able to plan for that, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what we're doing.
okay.
Okay, any more questions for Dan?
Not for Dan.
I have a question. George Jones, I live on Clover Lane. Just to get the full picture on the well and the drinking water and the hydrant system, they're all one and the same, right? It's one common well that feeds the hydrants along.
There's
with the
two
drinking-
wells.
2 months.
Yeah.
There are two wells that run, and they fill up a small tank down by their water plant. It's about 100,000 gallons.
Okay.
And then the pressure pumps that they utilize pull water from that tank and send it to what's called a hydropneumatic tank, which is a pressure tank. So it pumps it up to 90 PSI, which will sustain the pressure up into the upper ends of the system. The problem is when you open up a hydrant, it drains it very, very rapidly.
Right.
And none of the pressure pumps can keep up with that flow more than a minute or two.
Right, and that was my main question. So along with upgrading the hydrant system, you're gonna also have to do some work on the wells and the pumps and that sort of thing.
The wells, no, but we're going to add what's called a fire pump, which is a electric and or motor driven. It could be a diesel pump if you want, or a diesel motor.
To get the proper volume.
But it will be sized appropriately to supply 1,500 gallons a minute at 90 PSI for 2 hours.
But the two existing wells will be ample for what you're trying to do.
The storage is what the pumps will rely on.
Okay.
Once that, if the storage gets depleted after 2 hours, then I don't, you'll have the same situation you're in now, but the water will last 2 hours, 2+ hours.
Right.
That when we're done. And they should, the fire company and the NFPA, which is the code that we follow for design of this, states 1,500 gallons a minute for 2 hours. We're going to 2,000 gallons a minute for 2 hours. So we're going above design criteria as laid out by the standards.
So you're not gonna need any additional wells or deepening of the wells or anything along those lines? It's more or less the pumps?
Correct, that
You're
feed
gonna
the
have to
system.
upgrade. Yeah, okay.
And the adding of a second tank
Yeah,
for the 150.
For storage.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the storage that,
Yeah.
to allow for the 2 hours, correct.
There is 2 wells there, but I believe what I read in this report also was they only operate one at a time, correct?
Correct.
For the most
So,
part,
so
yes.
even if the one's depleted, you could fire up the other one, potentially, if you're in that situation, I would imagine.
Yes, you could.
Yeah,
Right.
so there's always a backup, hopefully.
yeah.
And then you're just waiting, I mean, those wells will kick on while you're depleting the system,
Right.
so it'll last even longer than 2 hours.
Yeah.
But then the tanks have to replenish. So, and essentially, the fire chief was at the meeting back, I don't even remember when it
Yeah.
was, other than it being cold.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was there and he said that there's no fire that should last more than that time frame ever in that development. That it should be less than an hour, that would be way more than adequate. So he stated that himself.
Yeah.
Is it over designed? You could say it is to a certain point, but we're meeting the standards plus some.
Yeah, I'd rather be a little over than under.
Absolutely.
So I'm good with that.
Absolutely. Typical engineer, it's meet the standards plus 150%, right?
Yeah.
1.5 times what's needed, right?
Okay. Any other questions for Dan? No, you guys good if
No.
he heads out?
I don't have any questions for Dan.
Okay. All right, I think you should run while you can.
Bet it's a long ride back to Harrisburg.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
You're very welcome.
I do have a question though, I want to clarify something. How, this work, how is this being paid for?
It is being paid for from the funds in Perkiomen Crossing Water.
Okay. So it's not being paid by everybody else in the community?
Correct.
So if a letter went out to the residents stating otherwise, that would be not true.
Correct.
Okay. So I got a question. So this letter was circulated to the residents back in last year's election. Said checks and balances. There's a section here that says, do you know that the current BoS voted unanimously last meeting to drastically limit the necessary increase to the water and sewage fee paid by the residents of Perkiomen Crossing development? Now the rest of us have to make up the difference. Guess who 2 of the current BoS residents reside? So what's the story with this letter? Who wrote this? And how many people did it go to?
I don't know. Let me see this one.
It says paid for by William Lamb for supervisor on it.
That's who the 2 current receivers are.
I can speak for Perkiomen Crossing. I can tell you we have a community page, as you well know, Sean, and multiple residents came back from that October meeting, which we weren't aware of because it was only advertised, I think, on Facebook, which not everybody is on Facebook to keep up with critical meetings, right? But regardless, there was a community post and many people were saying they came back from that meeting with that same messaging.
He just ignored
I
you.
know we
He
have
didn't
various
listen.
contributors, yes,
That's some teamwork shit.
various contributors that
Yeah,
provided information.
many.
You think?
Many people, Sean. It was on our community page. You saw that. Many people came from that meeting saying they heard that message at that meeting.
I'm not familiar with this particular post.
Of course not. You're never familiar with that.
But who sent this out? Did you guys send this out as part of your campaign?
Yes,
Okay, why did you put this in here?
we had heard from, we received input from various contributors.
Okay, are you going to correct this?
I think we just did.
And I think it was it was brought up in a previous meeting too as well.
Okay.
I want to say in December it was brought up.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that might not get the message, and I think a lot of people are upset by it, and I don't know if you're gonna send out a letter correcting this.
I think we should, right? Because many people in that neighborhood think that we have to fund it, right? So I think you should correct it. Because that's what was communicated. I don't know. I didn't relay anything to the 2 of you on this. I heard about it myself too. After the fact, it sounds like same as Sean, right? And at that October meeting, people were informed of that. And that's what went out on our community page.
Right. So look, something else to,
Can I just clarify? I think we're saying 2 different things. I think, yeah, I think you're saying that this letter went out
as part of a political campaign.
with the assumption that the general taxpayer would have to pay for this project.
Right.
But I think you're saying you were told that the residents of Perk Crossing are going to pay for it. Is that what you're saying?
I heard taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer.
Oh, okay.
No matter where I live, I'm a taxpayer.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the project will be fully funded by just the residents of Perkiomen Crossing, just to clarify. We have applied for $1 million grant to try to offset the cost of it. And the water fund does have close to $900,000 of reserve to help offset the cost of it. So the expectation is between the recent fee increases that went into place, along with the reserves and hopefully some grant money, that should be able to cover the cost of this project without having to increase any additional fees for the residents in the development.
I think where the confusion would have come from is if they're saying in a meeting that everybody's hearing taxpayers are gonna pay for it, what is everybody gonna think? Everybody who's a taxpayer is gonna pay for it. So I imagine that's where this line got drawn here. So I would say it was a miscommunication that somebody got in a meeting. I wasn't there at the meeting, so this here would be other people that were in this meeting.
So, look, I mean, the other thing that comes into play here is we talked about you have like a binder that you walk on and knock on people's doors with. My concern is that that binder of information is also similarly not full of accurate information.
Everything that's in the binder has the township's letterhead on top of it. So are you telling me the township website was incorrect?
I don't know, man, I wasn't there to hear your speech, but it sounds like it's not entirely on the level.
The whole last administration here wasn't on the level,
What, are you saying?
all the way through.
Sean,
Let's spend back Swayford Road. I was at the October meeting as well, and what his non-sustainable plan is, the trading funds between the water and sewer between Perkiomen Crossing, not increasing rates for 12 years or 10 years or whatever that number is, and relying on a grant to pay for this fund. So that is not sustainable, and the previous board of supervisors was supporting that. Finally, they did increase the rates, which was, I think, was a good thing. But there's a lot of borrowing and moving money around. That's not a sustainable plan. If you're going to fund the water, let's figure out a way to fund it. And that's where I think that language from the letter really comes from. Is the last board of supervisors, they weren't doing their part to make sure this is a sustainable over time plan.
We raised the rates to be sustainable in the last board.
When was the last time before that?
Good question.
10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Okay.
Right? So
10
there's a
years.
lot of people that were in those seats that led up to that.
I understand it's not your fault, but, and I don't blame you for that, but we want to sustain, the residents of, whether you live in Perkiomen Crossing or not, we want a sustainable plan. The last board of supervisors, they helped out at the very end, but that was it. It was a long line of bad decisions that haven't made this a sustainable plan. And I hope this moves that in the direction, because the Perkiomen Crossing residents, I mean, they deserve to have a sustainable plan over time.
So I spoke to several residents in Perk Crossing. I got a ton of emails, ton of phone calls, and I just talked to Ms. Tackett about it last month, and you were like, have them just call me, you know? And so I agree with you, Les. I'm just now getting here, Miss Lisa and I. This is something that's a big concern of mine. That family there, I'm the guy that knocked on their door and helped them out. I totally get the issues over there. I brought this to the table. Right now, this is the fix we have. Moving forward, I agree with you. The 10 years of not raising these rates is a big concern, and the little bit we did still doesn't cover it all. There's still a shortfall there.
Do you think we should increase it more?
I think what we have to do is educate ourselves on what we can do and not just make hasty decisions, because I think as it's proven in the past, that doesn't work.
Okay.
So I think that's what we're gonna do. I think we spoke about that earlier too, with the fee increases and everything else, how we can cover those, which is the same thing with this sewer plant. That's a unique situation over there. That's not, you know, all over Upper Frederick, so I think that's something that we gotta look into.
Okay.
Do you agree, Ms. Tackett?
Yeah, I think we have a sustainable plan,
Okay.
but, you know,
Do you think we should raise them more to
I
cover
do
that?
not. I think
that
we're in
shortfall?
pretty good shape.
Okay.
We have a period of time, I mean, I agree, it would have been nice if the rates had gone up incrementally over time, but that didn't happen, so we are in our situation we're in. The possible borrowing from water to sewer is a short-term situation, because we have a debt that the sewer is paying for 5 more years. Once it's $80,000 a year, once that debt is paid, if it has to borrow any money from water, it can pay it back at that point. And then we have funds to be able to do upgrades as needed. So we did run a lot of scenarios, and I think I've provided you guys with some different spreadsheets showing the different scenarios and how the numbers do appear to be sustainable. You know, I am hopeful that we won't have to raise the rates on the residents anymore. If we get the grant or any portion of the grant, I think that just allows us to keep a healthier reserve in the development for future projects. And so maybe we can wait longer to raise the rates again, because this was a pretty substantial rate increase for folks. You know, we've heard it from people, they feel it, you know, and so it's that balance of, you know, trying to make sure that you are protecting the development and their water and sewer system without having to like impact them too hard. So I think we made a good compromise increase. It looks like the numbers are sustainable. So, you know, we'll see what happens with the grant.
Those are 2 questions.
I have a question. In regard to the grant money, this almost $1 million, where exactly is the grant coming from? Is that a state grant, a
Yes.
federal grant?
It's a state grant.
And what's the status of that? When do you expect to hear?
We don't know. So it was submitted in October. It's the local share agreement grant from the state. The last time we applied for grants and got them, it took more than a year to get the funding.
Now, was the grant, when you filled out the application to the state, did you have to specify what the money was going to be used for?
Yes,
Okay. And it's solely going to be used for?
for that.
Yeah, for that
upgrade
project.
project.
Okay, that's pretty much all I needed to know.
Just so I'm clear on what you're saying now, so no misinformation gets put out anywhere. You're stating that with or without the grant, the cost of these projects is going to be borne solely by Perkiomen Crossing.
Absolutely, yes,
All right.
yes.
I heard with an offset of some other funds that are in some reserve somewhere. That's what I just heard.
You have, the Perkiomen Crossing has money in the water fund, about, I would say it's probably about $850,000 in reserve. Okay?
What happens if we don't get the grant?
That, well, there's a chance we won't get the grant, or we will only get a portion of the grant. We have it set up so that we will, so either way, the plan is to borrow money to pay for the project. And so there's a state agency called PennVest, and they offer very good rates to municipalities for utility projects. So I believe in our analysis, the rates were like roughly 2% interest rate is what, and so what we will do, once, we can't apply for the PennVest funds until the design of the project is complete. Once the design of the project is complete, we'll submit our PennVest application. PennVest, it's loans, but they also have access to grant funds. So you don't know though until they analyze the project whether or not they will apply some of their grant funds to the project. So we're sort of moving forward with worst case scenario.
Assuming
no grants.
No grants, okay, good.
Yeah.
I have a question. So with the request for the grant, as a resident of Perkiomen Crossing, would it be possible for us to see what the wording you guys used in the request for the grant?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
And how would we go about getting that?
I would suggest complete a right to know form. It should be on our website, and just ask for the grant application for the water project.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Okay.
I imagine you'll loop in the HOA board, the new board, right, at some point
Yep.
with all of this.
Absolutely.
Okay. Active development overview?
All right, so over the past couple years, there's been a couple official applications and then one conceptual application. On the board here on the TV is a concept plan for the property located at Perkiomenville Road and Big Road. It's the Myers property. This development went through conditional use approval and land development approval in 2023. It's essentially for an automotive type facility, but it's to restore historic cars. Essentially, the number of employees is going to be pretty minimal. It's, I think, going to be open to the public. Not really the public. They're going to have events there a few times a year. It's not open to the public. I think it's an extension of Mr. Meyer's facility in Boyertown. So this is a concept of kind of a couple of views of what they presented to the township. So this went through the review process with the Planning Commission and then was approved by the Board of Supervisors last year. And at this point, it's been approved. We're sort of waiting for final conditions of approval to be determined and for the property owner to get their approvals from the state, from PennDOT and an NPDES permit. The developer, the property owner, mentioned that their intention is to build this in phases. There was some concern about that, so one of the conditions was that all the stormwater management had to be developed in the first phase. And also, I think all the kind of the disturbance of the site to try to minimize the ongoing disturbance there. So those were some of the conditions for this development. Any questions? All right.
So we just wait then for,
Yeah, so right now
the ball's in their court, waiting for some state approvals.
It's back and forth between our engineer and their engineers as far as revising the plans to make sure all those conditions of approval have been complied with.
Satisfied.
Yeah.
Didn't Norm say in the planning meeting, he hasn't heard from them since they came in, right?
So so they sent an electronic version to him to review, and Norm likes hard copy, and so we've asked them to send over a hard copy version, and I'm not sure they've gotten that to him yet.
Okay.
So they have been in communication.
Okay.
So these are just some pictures of the development. Okay. So.
I have a question. Did the zoning change at all on that property, given this project or this proposed
The
project?
zoning did not change, but they did get some variances. So the property is zoned commercial.
Commercial, okay.
But because it's an automotive use, it wasn't absolutely clear that it was fully permitted there. So they did go to the zoning hearing board and get some relief.
Okay.
All right. This is a property on Heimbach Road. It's owned by Hendricks. This is a concept plan, so we have not officially received an application on this property. There had been a previous plan in kind of preliminarily approved back in the early 2000s. It was called Scioto Village, and it had just under 100 units. When the recession hit, it didn't move forward, but it stayed on the books up until, I think, 2022, when it was suggested